Hi there, guys, and welcome to the latest edition of the Weiss Crypto Sunday Special with me, your host, Chris Coney. Today, I'm joined by Kenny Pulcari for his first Sunday Special. Kenny, welcome to the Sunday Special, mate.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I look forward to this.
I sought you out specifically because I want to call this one DeFi for Wall Street. So the first question is it fair to consider you a Wall Street guy?
Yes, okay. It is.
So why is that? I mean, what?
Because I spent 40 years on Wall Street, right?
That was exactly it. Right?
I spent 40 years on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, right at the heart of the institutional game. So, you could consider me Wall Street.
You could say someone's a Wall Street guy, but they might work on Wall Street, not necessarily bang on the floor of the stock exchange, which is the true definition of the term, if you ask me. Okay, so that's why I want you on. I was talking to Martin Weiss the other day. And he said he's done some informal surveys around people in traditional finance, just to test people out and say to them, do you know what DeFi is? And a lot of them are like, is that blockchain? Don't know, right? And Martin's like, Chris, you don't realize how little awareness there is about this. Why don't you use Kenny as a proxy and then basically go do a back to basics DeFi, because everyone's talking about it, but sometimes you can have that kind of medium to high level understanding without say it's the hot thing and it's the thing to invest in, it's the future, but like, have you ever started with the ABCs and built it up from there, right? No one's ever took a formal training in it, right? So the first thing I wanted to ask you was, before I start flapping my gums, is what do you know about DeFi and where did you learn it, if anything?
I know very little about DeFi. That's why this was so exciting to me, because other than hearing the word being tossed around and how they use it now to talk about fintech and about payment systems and about Bitcoin and Ethereum and decentralized finance and decentralized this and decentralized that. So quite honestly, I'm actually looking forward to this, because I think it's going to be for me, and I'm not really sure, it's going to go past 15 minutes, my opinion, because there's going to be a lot to talk about, but I think you should take it from the top. First of all, why it's even called DeFi. Certainly it's a shortened version of decentralized finance. But so define that term, right?
Okay, sure. So in your world, is this just like a word salad? Blockchain, cryptocurrency, DeFi? Is it all like, there's no real discernment between what's what, and is it all the same thing? Is it like that in your head?
Well, that's what it feels like. I'm sure that's wrong, but that's what it feels like.
Okay, sure. Well, if no one's ever, this is what I'm getting at. If no one's ever filled it in, and I call them distinctions, because Bitcoin is distinct to cryptocurrency, is distinct to blockchain, is distinct to DeFi. Now they all have a relationship with each other, but we wouldn't need all those words if they were all different things. That's what I always say. Let's start at the top then. So DeFi, why is it called DeFi? Okay, so this is how I understand it. This is how I teach it to my students. So decentralized finance. Okay, so the first word, people say decentralized. What does that mean, right? Decentralizing what exactly? So, because it's decentralized is the negative of the word centralized. So, I'll define that in a second. So, what's centralized? Which means there's a central point somewhere. And that is not necessarily a location in space, as in, Washington, D.C. You could say the government is centralized in Washington, D.C. You could say that. But in finance, you could say that the stock market is centralized in New York, but it's not even like that, is it? It's not like a location, because you've got the CME and you've got the stock market. It's kind of spread out, right?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because prior to 9/11, you would have said that the stock market was very much, for listed stocks, was the New York Stock Exchange.
That was the center,
that was the center of it. Today, you could say that it's decentralized because the New York Stock Exchange no longer plays that significant pivotal role the way it did, just because of all the other exchanges that now exist and the technology that connects them and the trading that takes place across 70 different venues versus just at the New York Stock Exchange, right?
Totally with you. So if it's not the location that's no longer centralized, what is it? So I define it as the several prongs, really. The technical infrastructure, right? The power over that infrastructure, who controls it, and is the risk all in one place? So like the technology infrastructure, if you had one single web server in one office running the thing, there would be a single point of failure, a single point of attack, a single point where everything goes on, right? There would be a single owner of that computer who had the ability to unplug it, change the software, and so on. And therefore, all of the risk is centralized. So that would be very, very centralized, very high risk. All the risk is in one place. All the power and the control and the technical infrastructure is in the same place. So you can begin to kind of dilute that centralization in any one of those four categories. So the internet is a technical infrastructure that's decentralized. You've got lots of servers all around the world, right? Now, that might be if you run a mobile app business, say, like Robinhood, you could say that would run on a cloud service provider, which is someone like Google Cloud or Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure. So that's where they build these giant data centers, and they don't just build one either. They have all on every continent. And your app doesn't really run on any one of them, right? That's why it's called the cloud, because it just looks like one massive computer that then takes care of all of the geographic decentralization in case Africa has an earthquake or Japan falls off the face of the earth. It's just that cloud of computers. So it would, the server in the US would pick up the slack. But you as the developer of the app don't need to care about that. You just care, like, it's decentralized. All the servers are all around the world. There's no single point of failure. Great. So that would be decentralized from a technical perspective. But Robinhood still got a single login to, say, the Amazon cloud, where they could delete the app, change the app. So then you've got the other prongs of centralization. Like, it's all the power is centralized in one company, all the control is centralized in one company. And while the risk of the technical failure is decentralized, even that infrastructure is owned by a single company, Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, and they've got control over that. And why is that a problem? Well, Amazon have censored various apps that have been built on their infrastructure because of God only knows what reason. They've been pressured to, or because someone crosses a politically incorrect line or something like that. Amazon have the ability to just flick a switch and take off, turn off Twitter or whatever. Not Twitter particularly, but there have been some social networks that got taken off the internet. So it's like, headache. So for true decentralization, you'd need to decentralize all of those various prongs. So that's what decentralization means, geographically, technically, and in terms of the control, the governance, the authority, and the risk. So in the blockchain world, that really does do that, because it allows anyone to act as that technical infrastructure. Instead of having 10 Microsoft data centers on different continents, anyone can use their own little computer to contribute to that massive cloud of computers, and then all the computers share the load, right? But it doesn't matter if it's 1 million people, right, with one computer each, or Microsoft that have 1 million computers. Do you know what I'm saying? So if Microsoft have 1 million computers, that's decentralized in that way, but it's still one company. If people can permissionlessly join and leave the network, which is how the internet works, there's no central point of the internet. It's just all these different people connect together using the same, computer language, if you like, so that all the devices can talk to each other. That's the definition of a protocol. It's a language. So I say, like, the English language is like a protocol, because as long as you know the sounds to make and you know English, anyone who speaks English can communicate. It's kind of like that, just in computer terms, right?
Okay.
You with me? So finance then, decentralized finance, is the decentralization in all those areas. Yes, the technical infrastructure is decentralized by this ownerless, sort of permissionless technical infrastructure. No one single person has power over that system because it all runs on open source software, which means all the software code is freely open and auditable. So everyone knows exactly what the code says, exactly how it's going to run. And if anyone were going to put some kind of backdoor in there or security hole, everyone would see it. So the reason why Microsoft have risen to the point that they're at is because they sold closed source software. They wrote all the code, kept that a closely guarded secret, and then only they know, right, how Windows works under the hood. The downside to that is that if a hacker or a cracker finds a security hole in Windows, they can exploit that until Microsoft find out. There is no army of users also, a million eyeballs inspecting the code. Whereas in the open source, which extends way beyond DeFi and blockchain, by the way, that is the case. Open source software is there for anyone in their spare time, professionally or unprofessionally, to just have a read of the code, see if there's some cool stuff in there, see if you can see some improvements, see if you can see some security holes. And if you find anything funky, you can just submit that as an interesting point of view. You can say, look, I don't think this is secure for this reason. You discuss it with all the other informal developers, and the software evolves through a crowdsourcing activity, right? And that's superior in many ways to even Microsoft just couldn't afford that many developers, right? Because they've got a business model. Whereas open source is all done voluntarily and for free by enthusiasts and also professionals who do it on the side when they've got some spare time. So that's one of the keys to DeFi and blockchain is all of it, 99.9% of all the software that's written is open source. So that's good from a security point of view, it's good from a governance point of view, and no single developer can just arbitrarily change the code and say, we're shipping that product now because I've decided this is the feature I want in there. Can't do it. Doesn't work like that. So does that bit make sense? Because there's lots of this is the complex thing about blockchain is it was you're a chef, right? So it's the recipe. That's why I always say about Bitcoin, the technologies it uses, like the ingredients, are not revolutionary. It's the same old, the same old ingredients that were already there for 10 years prior. It was the genius of the recipe, and that you'll know is the difference between your lasagna and my lasagna. Right. You'd be like, what? Kenny's is so much better. Even if we were given the same ingredients, and they do that on cooking shows sometimes, don't they? They put some amateur against a real chef, same ingredients, vastly different results, right? Because, of their experience and knowledge. So that's basically the breakthrough of Bitcoin, was putting these various components in a particular recipe that became Bitcoin, that allowed this flourishing of decentralized finance. Okay. Yeah. So I said a lot of words there because it's a kind of an important point. So you might then ask, well, this idea of what's the difference between, say, DeFi and the cloud computing thing? Because it sounds similar. You've got all these various computers around the world that are sharing the load in running these apps. So you say, well, how is that any different to Robinhood? You just said that that runs on lots of different servers.
Right.
Well, the difference is the ownership of the infrastructure is widely diversified amongst many, many different people. So the reason that differs from the online banking systems of the world and things like Robinhood is that it's ownerless, and anyone can join that network and provide some of the hosting infrastructure for it, and they can come and go as they please, right? So that's that first piece. So then, where to go from there, really? We've done the sort of 4 prongs of centralization. Oh yeah, right. I said earlier on that maybe DeFi or decentralized finance is the wrong term to use because it's defined by a negative. It's like decentralized, like not centralized. Right. Well, if it's not centralized, what is it? Right? Because you can't define something by a not. So I think that if you called it networked finance, that would make a lot more sense. Okay, because these they are networks. There are lots of different individuals that just use these software protocols to allow them all to connect to each other and communicate with each other. Did you say that?
But they are in fact decentralized, right? So I think decentralized is the proper way to define it, because network finance to me almost sounds like it's a network together versus decentralized. I think defines it better, because now it's not network finance almost sounds to me like it's dependent upon a central network, versus decentralized gives me the impression that you're no longer dependent on a central network. Am I missing something?
No, that's interesting to say, because I'm trained from the computer science world. So it's difficult for me to break the definitions that I've learnt.
Right.
But it's critical that you say what you just said, though, because if when you hear the word network finance, it means something different. That's something I would need to know as someone who's teaching this stuff to people. Right.
Well, that's just me. I mean, that's what it sounds like. I said, I'm as new to this as you can get, so I'm just giving you first impressions. Because decentralized sounds just the way you said it, right? It's decentralized, right? It's not dependent upon a center, a one place, right?
Yeah, no one person, one place. Yeah, no one country.
Right. I mean, which is exactly, again, and I'll just put this back to my own experience. Like at the New York Stock Exchange during 9/11, right? Prior to 9/11, the New York Stock Exchange was the central marketplace.
Yeah. Sure.
But when 9/11 happened, because of all the damage that had happened downtown New York City and to the infrastructure that ran the New York Stock Exchange, the New York Stock Exchange became neutered, right? It didn't, in fact, work. And so thus, today we have a very decentralized market system, right? Some people say it's fragmented, or some people say it's fractured, because it's you can trade Coca-Cola on any of 70 different venues today. Prior to 9/11, Coca-Cola traded at the New York Stock Exchange, right? Today you can buy it on NASDAQ. You can sell it on you can sell it on the CBOE. You can buy or sell it on the New York Stock Exchange. You can trade it at any one of the dark pools. You can trade it at any one of the alternative trading systems that's out there. And so it's become decentralized.
Very true. Now that's a good point. So this is where it is really nuanced, because that what you've just described could have been described as decentralized finance.
Correct.
Because it's fractured from a centralized exchange to this, competitive environment of exchanges.
Correct.
That offer the same service to trade the Coca-Cola stock, for example, right?
Yeah.
And each of those exchanges, they have a different owner. So that
correct.
That's all still matches the description of being decentralized in that way. So that's very, very interesting. So I'm actually learning something from this as well, because I don't have that Wall Street perspective, and perhaps this is where people from my world and your world talk crossways sometimes, is that, we might be saying things like decentralized and rattling off the decentralized nature of it. And then someone like you goes, well, that's not that innovative, because that's kind of how it works now.
Right.
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 So,
okay.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So, I suppose I'd need some diagrams to really draw those distinctions, but we've kind of drawn them in the air a little bit there. So,
right.
I'll ask myself the question. So what is the difference between that infrastructure you just described with the many exchanges trading the Coca-Cola stock and the blockchain world of decentralized finance? Okay. What is the difference? And what is the benefit to an investor, let's say? Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So the major difference is that there is a standard across all of the quote unquote exchanges in the DeFi world, right? There is a standard that all assets adhere to. So it's totally frictionless in that way. Because a Coca-Cola stock, what is it? It's a piece of paper, right? It's a share certificate that says Kenny Pulcari owns these many, right?
Well, right.
Right. But the thing is, though, there must be a central database that records that. How many shares are in issue? Where's that? Is it a filing cabinet in Washington? Seriously, I don't know.
No, it's not the filing cabinet in Washington.
I don't know.
Right. It's
where is it? Is it in the broker's offices? Where is the share certificate?
I get. Well, the certificates really no longer exist today, right? It's all been automated.
Oh, fine. So that's not a thing anymore, right? So they are digital. They are digital assets. Then they must be. They must be considered digital assets.
Well, I guess they're digitized, but it's not I wouldn't call it a digital asset, because when you think of digital asset, you think of Bitcoin or Ethereum. So I would not think of Coca-Cola as a digital asset. I would think that the certificate has been digitized because it's the 21st century, but it's not a digital asset. Don't confuse that.
Well, I don't know, because even the certificate was only a representation that, informally or formally you owned
that you owned a piece of that company. Correct.
Right.
Right. So now you own it. When I go out and I buy or sell Coca-Cola or General Electric, I own or I am selling a piece of that company right? If I'm buying it, that I'm becoming an owner of it.
Yeah,
if I sell it, that I'm selling my ownership in that company, represented by that share of stock. Now, what used to physically be the exchange of physical certificates today is all done, electronically. So it's more efficient. But B, I would be careful though to define it as digitized. Though I don't think about it like that.
You don't.
It is digitized, I guess, because it's become, it's all done electronically. But it's not digitized in the way that people understand digitized, like NFTs today and all that crap. It's not that.
But it's not that. They say there's nothing new under the sun. So the concepts are very similar. I guess that's what I'm trying to do is build bridges. Because even that share certificate, that wasn't the asset. That was a representation that you had title to it. And title isn't physical. So if it's a piece of real estate, the real estate is physical, but the title is an agreement as to who owns it. But that agreement is non-physical. Because it's an agreement.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? And yes, we had a piece of paper that represented that. It's an abstraction from it, right? And I suppose the difference with the cryptos is, and this is actually a perfect segue, is that they are like native to the networks that they live on. So the traditional financial system kind of evolved from a paper-based system in a world where all assets were physical. So we went from physical assets to physical representation of assets like stock certificates or gold certificates or promissory notes for the amount of gold in the bank and so on. And I suppose that's evolved. And then as technology and computer systems have come along, there's been this weird overlapping of, I call it the dematerialization of that system. But but you can see it transforming slowly. Whereas once that technology infrastructure was there, you can almost have like a new starting point, start from scratch. It's like, okay, now we've got the internet, and now with DeFi, it's like, now we've got blockchain technology. If we were going to reinvent the idea of an asset, how would we do it today, right? And I think that is the major distinction, the hard stop between the financial system that was developed in, say, the 1900s, that was all physical assets and all physical representations, that was gradually computerized, as you say. That's a very good point you made. Which is still trying to do the paper thing but digitized, whereas there's a hard stop post-internet where people start on the internet as a base and go forward from there with no legacy to the paper-based system.
Oh, okay.
You with me?
Yeah. Okay. And I think that's fine. I think that's at least it sets a foundation. Like you said, you got to set the foundation. You got to start to build a house. You got to understand from the beginning how it's built, right? Okay.
I do see us. It's so close, though. Now I've had this conversation with you. It's so close. When you say that the existing system has all these exchanges and it is decentralized and the assets have been digitized, right? The difference between the system we've got now and DeFi, it is revolutionary, but it's hard. It's easy to miss where it flips. And that's why I made the strong point about if we're going to start again and create the representation of assets in a digital system, how would we do it, right? And that's what blockchain allows you to do with DeFi. The major difference is it sort of turns it inside out. So rather than, I made a note about a spider's web. Yeah, so it's a spider's web. So everyone knows what a spider's web looks like. It's sort of like an outer circle, and then there's an inner circle, and then a circle inside that. It's not a circle, and then there's these sort of connecting web thingies. There is a definite center to it, and there are lots of crossing off points. So in the traditional financial system, there is all those central points of failure, risk, and control, and so on. Where the people who control the systems, the exchanges, the governments, the regulators, and so on, they have power and control over the system at large because they can regulate it, they can censor payments, they can call up Kenny Pulcari's exchange and say, can you freeze that guy's account please? All that sort of stuff, right?
Right.
So that's fine because the control is still somewhat centralized. But when you turn that inside out and you go from power being at the center of the spider's web at some authority's will, and then all of the investors are on the outside, right, looking in at that central point. Whereas with DeFi, it starts the other way around. It's like, what if power, control, and ownership of the assets were in the sovereign ownership of the users on the outside? And what if they had power, control, and custody of their own assets? And then people towards the center, like the brokers and everybody else, had to then offer services to those people, which they didn't have to take, right? If by default you could hold your own assets perfectly securely and without any risks of them being stolen, etc. So by default, you'd be sovereign. And then if you wished, you could engage with the financial services industry. Whereas in the traditional system, you have no choice. You have to, you're sort of like a little bit disempowered because they're your assets, but you still don't have you're not fully empowered and you don't fully control them. You know what I mean? And there are benefits to it. I'm just making it as a principle.
Yep.
So that's another key distinction where the blockchain world of decentralized finance differs from traditional finance.
Right. Okay.
And also because it was conceived in the age of the internet, I suppose the internet doesn't recognize geography. And this is the trouble that countries, governments, and lawmakers are having since the internet came along.
Right.
There's this brilliant thing that Andreas Antonopoulos said, and he's a blockchain cryptocurrency teacher, and he said when someone says to you, "Oh, that's illegal," you have to say where.
Right.
Because as we know, certain things, cannabis is now, state level legal in the US, federally illegal, still very illegal in the UK, no matter what. Right? It's not even. I don't think we might have some medical uses for it, but it's very, very tightly restricted. So you can't even say cannabis is illegal. You say, well, where? It's legal and illegal at the same time on planet Earth.
Right.
Whereas on the internet, none of that is recognized because it's in cyberspace. So it you know what I mean? And when you invent things in cyberspace, all of these geographically based ideas don't translate.
And that's true. And I think that's what's changing the world. And like you said, that's why everyone's having such a difficult time with it, governments and regulatory, because it's all one. The fact is, it's really all one, right?
Sure.
Because of the internet.
Because of the internet. So I'm going to take that even further because I've just had another insight. So like I said, if you had a clean slate, right? If you've got those technologies, blockchain and the internet, and you said, okay, let's reinvent the idea of the asset from scratch. Right. How would we do it given the tools that are available? You end up with cryptocurrencies, right? That is why blockchain is revolutionizing the world, because now what's happening, now we have those technologies, this global network called the internet, and these asset tracking system databases called blockchains. Every industry one by one now is having to ask themselves that same question. If we were going to reinvent our industry from scratch today with things like the internet and blockchain technology, how would it be, right? Now, the incumbents don't seem to want to do that because obviously well ingrained in the way they do it now, but that's what's happening. Governance systems are already well advanced. Like, how do you govern a world that runs on cyberspace? Well, the blockchain industry is already well ahead on that, using blockchain technology for governance in the same way that we've described. All the users get a say, everyone's got a stake in it, there's money at stake, so it's not an arbitrary vote, things like this. So all of the little things are governing themselves in a decentralized way. So every little thing, every little community governs itself, and so on.
So what's interesting here is that we're talking about decentralized finance. Yeah. Could we have decentralized everything else at some point?
Well, yes.
Right? But in this case, DeFi specifically is talking about decentralization in the finance industry.
Yes. And I would say, so would you consider asset ownership finance? Probably not.
Would I consider what?
Like asset ownership. It crosses over, cars, houses, computers.
Yeah, but you see, yes, but I don't necessarily consider that, you know, cars and houses as finance.
Okay, good. In that case, now I just wanted to clarify that because you said, could we have decentralized everything? So yes, then. So
I mean, yeah, are you going to have decentralized real estate?
well, yes and no. Well, the ownership would be, and that's why I go back to title, right? Because title, like we have the land registry in the UK, which is a centralized government database that has all the properties listed and the owners, right?
Yeah.
And that's a central database that gets updated every time someone buys, sells a house, whether it's a listed building, a castle, whatever, right? So, but the government controls and owns that, right? And you have to request that they update it whenever you transfer ownership of the asset that you own. Do you have that asset? Do you have the right to transfer the title? Yes. Who do you want it transferring to? Blah, 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 blah. It's very slow, though, because when you have to ask a third party to do that, right, there's some friction in there and there's the possibility of them saying no. But why would they do that? It's my asset, right? That's all that.
Right.
So when you sort of like disintermediate that by taking the center out of it, that's another decentralization, the removal of all centers, and you make it peer-to-peer, person to person.
Right.
You could have decentralized title where every property was a token on the blockchain.
Right.
And then, because of that, it adheres to all the benefits I just described. I have full custody of it. It's in my possession. No one can take it. I'm the only one on the planet, right, that can remove that from my wallet and send it somewhere else. It can't get lost. If I broadcast a transaction that says transfer ownership of my house to Kenny Pulcari, that transaction either succeeds and it ends up in your wallet, or it fails and it ends up back in my wallet. It doesn't get lost, right? It's none of these bank transfers that disappear for 3 days when the money's not in my account, money's not in your account. None of that. It can't happen, right? Because it's all instant settlement. The ownership is all tracked, transparent, auditable in real time on the internet by everybody. Right. So that was a long way around to say yes. Anything that's an asset that has a registered owner, a car, right? We have the DVLA in the UK where, all the registration numbers. And that's a big business as well. Registration numbers, those fancy private registrations numbers that say like Kenny 1, that sell for 100 grand or whatever. Yeah. That's an asset, right? Same thing.
Yeah. I mean, in that sense, you're right. It is an asset.
But it also has title.
Right.
Yeah.
You're right.
And when I sell you the Kenny 1 number plate, I have to then tell the DVLA, can you please transfer this? Right. And then it gives you the right to display that on your car.
Yeah.
But in a blockchain world, that would take 10 seconds. You and I would meet in the pub. You'd say, I'd give you 1 Bitcoin for it. I'd say, done. Right? You'd send the 1 Bitcoin to me. It would arrive in my wallet. I'd send you the token. That asset is transferred to your ownership. Now you can drive around with that on your car, and if the police stop you, you say, can you please prove you own this number plate? You'd show them your phone on the blockchain. I'm Kenny Pulcari. I own this asset. They'd be like, on your way. Not, can we see your documents? We'll go check it out with the central authority, blah, blah. That's what technology does. It removes friction. It speeds it up. It's like self-service, instantaneous verification of these things.
Right.
So anyway, that just seems to do what technology does. It allows you to self-serve instantaneously and cheaper all the time.
Yeah. Okay.
It looks like it's cooking your noodle a little bit. What's going on?
What'd you say? I missed it.
I said it looks like it's cooking your noodle a little bit. Because you were like,
it is, but I said this to you in the very beginning, right? I'm one of those guys that's starting at the bottom. So it's been all very fast. It's all very fascinating to hear. And it just causes you to want to go out and learn and understand more about it, like anything else, right?
Absolutely. So you've seen the bell curve, right? Well, you know what the bell curve is. So there's, of course, that applies to technology. And I know it as the diffusion of innovation. So all new technologies go through the bell curve. And there's the 4 segments. You get the innovators, the early adopters, early majority, late majority, and the laggards. Now I can see this with crypto and DeFi. When you get it, depends where you sit on that bell curve, right?
Right.
The more you can see it in your mind's eye, the less it has to develop before you get it. So at the very early end of it, as soon as say the inventor of Bitcoin sends out his scientific white paper that says this is the outline for Bitcoin, the blockchain technology.
Okay.
Computer scientists, some computer scientists would have read that and gone, that's interesting, without seeing the full vision of what it enabled. But people like Andreas Antonopoulos, who was a computer scientist and did understand a bit of economics, this happened to me as well. The minute I read it, everything we just described, tokenization of car ownership, decentralization, I saw it like that, right? But it didn't exist yet, right? So I got it then, and that's why I'm an evangelist. But not everyone gets it at that point, because it maybe needs a lot of technical understanding or experience to get it conceptually. So other people will need to see it working. So there's this whole phase of development and building infrastructure. So maybe you, not you in particular, but maybe you'd be the type of person where I'd have to actually sit down with you and say, right, Kenny, we're at the point now where download this app from the App Store, show me the little code on your screen, and I'll send you this digital asset. And being there it is, maybe it needs to get to that point where you go, oh, now I get it as an experience, right?
Right.
And maybe it needs to go all the way until the laggards where, Granny Olive is wanting to sell her house, and now the whole paperless system is gone, and all real estate is represented by tokens, and the only way she can sell it is if she gets her phone out and then sends it. And now that might be her first experience of it, and then finally she gets it because she has to. And that's on the right-hand side of the bell curve, where the people who just cling on to the VHS tape until their old VCR breaks down and they can't. They're like going to buy blank tapes and they don't sell them anymore.
They can't do it anymore.
Right? No VHS. Oh, my VCR is broken down. No more repairmen. I'm gonna have to buy a DVD player. You know what I'm saying? And maybe they get it eventually when they finally try DVD. They go, "Oh, I should have done this ages ago," right?
Right.
And that's the trouble.
Yeah, but so let me ask a question or explain this. With the evolution of this technology, it only creates more power and control and responsibility, right? And so that gets all moved to the end user. So it gets moved to me or it gets moved to you, which is I guess, the ultimate definition of financial empowerment, right?
Exactly. That's a good point. So this is also a difficult thing that the investors are having to wrap their head around, because with all that sovereignty and empowerment, you're then taking responsibility as well, which isn't really part of the existing system. So much so that goes all the way to the top.
Yep.
And was it you and I? Oh no, I think it was Juan and I had this conversation about, was it Maxine Waters, who were talking about cryptocurrencies, people investing and losing money. And she said, well, who's going to make those people whole? And Juan and I just blew our mind because
she had no clue.
Think about what are you talking about? Like you're talking about the possibility of investing with no downside.
Right.
That's basically like
she's got no clue.
Right.
I mean, you were as horrified as we were. Trust me.
Okay. But that's the.
But let me ask you a question.
Go for it.
So if you're going to use DeFi, decentralized finance, or DeFi, in a Wall Street model, right?
This is where I wanted to get to. Right.
Okay. So great. So then pitch it to me. Tell me what you do. Tell me what the benefits are.
Well, I want to do it the other way around, because I am from the DeFi world. So even the title of this, when I came up with it, DeFi for Wall Street, I'm like, I'm struggling. I would struggle to sell it to the Wall Street types, right? And do you even need to? The trouble is, it's a competitive infrastructure to Wall Street. It almost, I dare say, begins the process of obsoleting that model.
Well, it absolutely does, but that's what technology does too, right? I mean, along the way, technology creates these efficiencies, which ultimately then destroy what we knew to create something different.
Right.
So whether it's just the advances in technology are going to do that, or whether it's a whole new technology like decentralization that's gonna significantly change it quickly, it's going to be changed one way or the other. It's changes here and it's coming.
Okay, well that's your attitude. The trouble is, like back to when does someone get it on the bell curve? Everyone has a different attitude towards change.
Well, correct. Okay, and I'll be the first one to admit that. But
you're open to it though.
I don't see it, because you have to be open to it. It's not like, listen,
you don't have to be, but you are.
Well, if you do, because if you're not, you're going to get run over, and you're just not going. The world is going to. The truth is, the world is going to pass you by.
Yeah, steamroll
if you're not, if you don't understand it.
Right. So it's like you can go the easy way or the hard way.
No, because it's going to start to affect every single thing we do, like you just said. Right. Every asset you own, every little thing that you have, is all going to become decentralized.
Yeah, but what if you're in denial? What if you think it never happened? What if you're that Wall Street guy?
I think you'll get run over. You'll get run over.
I'll take the
risk. Because listen. Let me just tell you. I'll just tell you an anecdote.
Okay, sure.
From my own personal experience, there was no way technology was going to change the way stocks in this country were traded, because it was too important. It was never going to work. They could never recreate it. They could never mimic the role of the broker.
You were that guy.
I was that guy.
Okay, wow.
I was that guy. But what happened was, I was correct where they were never going to be able to mimic the role of the broker in the system we had.
Okay.
Which was trading stocks in fractions, an eighth of a dollar. And that system, absolutely right. They could not recreate it. But they could recreate it if they broke the system down and then went to sub-decimalization, creating so many different price points within the full figure. So between $20 and $21, there's now 1,000 price points that you could trade at. Before, there were only 7 price points you could trade at.
Mm-hmm.
An eighth, a quarter, 3/8, half, 5, 7/8, right? Today, there's 1,000 price points. There's 0.0001, 0002, all the way up to 9999. And so once they did that, then the decentralization happened, and the fragmentation happened, and the fracturing of the system happened, because then there became other exchanges that could compete, and volumes were driven to where it was going to get the best price, and it wasn't necessarily in the old-fashioned way. Now, I was the first one to put my feet in the ground and say, nope, never going to happen, not going to do it, not going to do it, not going to do it. And then all of a sudden it started to happen, and I go, oh, shit, I better change the way I think.
But that's what I was saying earlier on about perhaps you're the guy that you have to start to see it happen before you go, oh, now I understand.
No, yes, I would agree. There are some people that are going to have to start to see it happen before maybe they'll change their mind. There are other people that are more, insightful or more forward thinking that can already imagine it. Even when we're still here, they can imagine what it's going to be like here.
And it has to be, because those are the people that build it.
Correct.
To show it to you.
Correct.
Right.
And so, I used to be the guy over here, and now I'm more to the middle. I'm moving this way, but right. I'm no longer way over here now. I'm certainly much more to the middle and much more moving because I lived it, right? I experienced that exact the result of resisting that change. I resisted it hard.
That actually just helped me. What came to my mind when you were talking about the fractional ownership of stocks is really, if we boil it, because I'm always looking for deeper and deeper root causes to things. What's been happening underneath all this stuff is computers have been getting cheaper and more powerful. That's correct. Really, really at the base of it, right? Why does that matter? Well, because in order to do these fancy schmancy techno finance systems, well, the computer systems used to be so expensive that only the New York Stock Exchange could afford that kind of technical infrastructure.
Okay.
That's now, a fraction of the power of your smartphone. So as that technology comes down in price and drastically goes up in power, you get to the point where your regular home computer can do that stuff. So it commoditizes those advanced techniques so that everyone can do them. And then you don't need, quote unquote, experts to do that, or big companies, because anyone can do it. But then those big players have to evolve, right, to a high level of complexity. Now, what can you do with the modern supercomputers, right? And that will be always be their domain, right? And that's really where the blockchain world, you've got relatively cheap computing infrastructure that can do these ridiculous financial systems that make like fractional ownership of stocks trivial. So you can pay these tiny transaction fees, get them settled in seconds. That all relies on these extremely powerful and cheap computers that we now have.
Okay.
So now it's not a case of the traditional finance system and all the expertise has to die. It's how are they going to evolve to provide value in this new world? That's the question they should ask themselves. If they want to maintain the fat profit margins and all that sort of stuff, they can, but the service is going to have to evolve on top of all this stuff. And that's their job, not mine. But it's there.
Yeah, no, and I would agree. I think that absolutely has to happen, right? But that's part of the process, I guess.
So in your day-to-day, what is it you do? You do wealth management?
Well, so in my day-to-day today, I've left that side of the business. Like the New York Stock Exchange, I'm not there any longer, right? I mean, because I said that job, that role that I did, the job I had, no longer exists today. Okay. That job's been completely automated away. So it just wasn't any fun for me anymore to sit there and just stare at a computer all day. I just didn't. It just was not what I was going to do. So I pivoted. I took all my years of experience and I moved into the wealth management space. Gotcha. And so now I help advise high net worth individuals and other individuals that are looking to invest and put long-term plans together and all that stuff. So I educate them. I build plans for them. I help them understand the system. I help them understand risk management, portfolio management, wealth management, and I do it. So that's how I pivoted. So and I happen to do it in Florida now, not in New York anymore. Right? I didn't need to be in New York. I can be anywhere I want.
So for you personally, that's why you've got an incentive to be open about this, because you need that macro view of everything that's going on for your client's sake as well as your own.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you have to be able to talk to it and advise and educate, right? If they don't understand it themselves, they come to somebody looking for an education as well. So yeah, absolutely.
And I've heard some people, I won't name the names because I'll probably misquote them, but some pundits have said things like, when does it become a fiduciary responsibility to get your clients involved in crypto? Because at the moment, because it's largely unregulated, you could be one of those laggard guys who says like, the client's like, oh, what's this crypto thingy, blah blah, DeFi, but don't worry about it, it's going away. Right?
No, but yes, I understand the conversation, but no, I'm not. I'm actually one of the guys that says to clients that if they are not considering it, why not? And in my opinion, it should be part of everyone's portfolio, but not any amount that's going to cause anyone to lose their life savings if something goes wrong. So, if you're in there with a 3 or 5% allocation, that gives you exposure. You get to start to understand what it is. You get to learn more about it, and you get to participate if, in fact, the world changes the way we all expect it's going to. You are participating in the growth of that, right? There are other people that say to me they want to go all in, and I go, not with me, you're not. I won't put somebody all in because that goes against my fiduciary responsibility.
Good call.
If you want to go all in, go open an account at Robinhood and take all your money and go all in. But you're not doing that with my name attached to it, right?
Yeah, sure.
But that also doesn't mean I'm not telling you that you shouldn't have exposure to it, which is what I've done, right? And I think the interesting part of that is right now you can't, because it's unregulated yet, it's not like you could just go out and buy it on an exchange like you can a stock. You can buy fraction, but I mean at a like it doesn't trade at the New York Stock Exchange. It doesn't trade at the NASDAQ, right? But you go to one of Coinbase or Binance or one of the other markets, and you can buy fractional ownership of it, right? You don't have to buy. Some people think, geez, I don't have $30,000 to buy a Bitcoin. Well, you don't need $30,000 to buy a Bitcoin. You can take $50 and buy a fraction of it. You're participating. You own some of it. But you should be, in my opinion, for anybody, you should be about 3 to 5% of your portfolio. Now, listen, if you're 22 years old and you want it to be 10 or 15% of your portfolio because you're 22 and that's what you want, I would say, okay, I'm okay with that if that's what you want to do. But if you're someone who's 40 or 50 or just getting into it and you want it to be part of your plan, 5% max is what I would say to anybody, right? Until there's a better understanding of it, or better understanding meaning, it's going to be regulated somewhere, or it's going to be, you can use it more easily than, it becomes something that you use in your everyday life. Right now, the Bitcoin and Ethereum that I own, I don't use them in my everyday life. I own them, they sit in my account, and that's it. I don't use them to buy things. I don't do anything with them other than I own them.
I'm with you. Yeah.
Right. So that's what I have. And so in my case, I try to keep it about 5%. So I fluctuate somewhere between 4 and 5% depending on where it's trading today. You know that
proportion. When you were saying that, I made a note. So it would make sense to me if you change the allocation based on the proportion of the finance sector that DeFi occupies. So if right now, say 95% of the finance sector is still running on traditional financial rails, and then crypto and DeFi blockchain only accounts for 5% of it, maybe that would be a logical allocation. And as DeFi and whatnot becomes half of it, you can increase your exposure because now it's a safer bet.
Correct. I think you're absolutely right. And so what I mean is when it becomes, when it becomes more of a regulated product, or the central banks start to, I don't know if the central banks are ever going to embrace it, or they're going to embrace their own.
True.
Right. And so that's kind of these are the conversations you're having with investors, with people that are just beginning to learn about it, just trying to understand it. How come the Federal Reserve doesn't control it? Or how come the European Central Bank doesn't control it? Well, that's the whole point. They don't control it. That's the whole point, right?
It is the point. But that's where on the back to the bell curve thing, they don't even appear on it, because what happens when an invention comes along that threatens the very existence of your organization? Right, you're never going to embrace it.
Right.
Because it's an existential threat. Like that's the problem.
And that is the problem, I think, that governments around the world and regulatory agencies around the world are trying to wrap their heads around at the moment. But one way or the other, is it an asset that I think people should have exposure to? 1,000%. But is it an asset that people should be overexposed to? I would say no, but that's also my personality, right? You might be a much more aggressive personality. You also might be half my age. I'm 60. I'm not going all in on Bitcoin at 60. I'm just not. Now, I might increase my allocation as we move through time, and if, like you said, these things start to become clearer, or they're widely accepted, or they're regulated, then then maybe it becomes bigger, right?
I'm with you. I also don't advise people to go all in.
No, it would be foolish to do that.
Well, I think so. I mean, I just gave that model where I say that whatever the proportion of DeFi represents the finance sector, that's a guideline for your allocation. But what I've said in the past is your exposure should equal your level of understanding.
Okay,
the fact
that's
that
fair enough.
I'm heavily exposed to it reflects the fact that I do this for a living and I'm studying it all the time, every day. So that's but no one should, unless you're doing that, you shouldn't have anywhere near that kind of exposure.
Okay, but just to be clear, so we don't send the wrong message, you might be doing it, and it's what you do every day, and you're heavily exposed to it. That doesn't mean that you're necessarily protected. If technically Bitcoin trades down below 30, it trades down to 20,000, you're still heavily invested in it, but you've just lost a lot of money.
True.
Okay, so what I'm saying is the message is that you're heavily invested in it because it's what you do for a living, right? I'm heavily invested in stocks because it's what I do for a living, but I'm not heavily invested in any one stock. I don't have all my eggs in one basket is the point.
I am with you. And actually, what I was getting at there is my understanding gives me an outlook that makes me bullish, and therefore that's why my exposure is because of where I think it's going, and where I think it's going is based on my deep understanding. So
that's right. Now listen, I like I said, I own both. I own Bitcoin and I own Ethereum. I'm looking to buy more, but I think it's going to back off a little bit. So I'm being patient. I could be wrong, but that's how I'm playing this game. Because if it breaks 30,000 and trades down into the mid 20s, I'm going to back up the truck, because that's where I think technically it's going to go. Doesn't mean I don't like Bitcoin. I do. I want it to come in so I can buy more. In fact, if it doesn't come in, I'm going to end up buying more, because it's going to have completely done something different than I expected, but yet I still want in. So if I'm forced to pay up because it doesn't come my way, well, then that's the risk I'm willing to take.
Young people don't have that. They don't have the benefit of patience.
Well, there are some people that don't. That's correct. There are some people that, that's right. They want instant gratification. So you're right.
I don't think that's necessarily anything like greed on their part. It just might be a function of time relative to how long they've lived. If you're 20,
okay, that might be true. That might be true. Exactly right. So what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that it's a negative or that you shouldn't buy it. You absolutely should. But think about the guy. I laugh because I think about the guy. What was the top tick? $64,000, whatever it was, 2 months ago.
Yep.
So I think about the guy that was so excited to get in, and he paid the top tick at $64,000, and it's gone down 50% from that point.
Yep.
Now, how does he feel? Is he sad? Is he upset? Is he angry?
Depends on how he intended to hold it.
That's right. He might be all three. Maybe he's already out of it. Maybe he bought it at 65 and he sold it at 60 and he's out of it, or not. Or maybe he was like me. He said, okay, I dip my toes and I get in, but now that things come in 50%, so if I liked it at 64,000, I have to be in love with it at 34,000.
That's a good call.
Right?
That's a good call.
So it depends again on who you are, where you are in your life cycle, where you are in the risk scale, how much you understand of it, how you educate yourself every day about it, I think is all very important. And I think, conversations like this are great, especially for, listen, I'll be the first one to say, I've got a clear understanding the way you described it at the very beginning of this conversation, kind of the things that I may not have understood, the way you described it shed kind of a new light on it, the way I think about it. So maybe I'm not going to wait for it to go back to the mid-20s. Maybe this is the low and I should buy it now.
We'll keep an eye on the Weiss newsletters because one will give you a call when he's ready.
Yeah. It's fun. It's very interesting because the other day when it broke 30,000, it was trading at 29.6 or whatever it was.
Yep.
Then yesterday, here in America, they had that B event, which I'm sure you heard.
The B
right?
word.
The B word, whatever it's called, B word, B event. Elon Musk and Jack Dorsey and Kathy Wood, which I also thought was a very interesting combination of people. What the hell is Jack Dorsey doing in that conversation, in my opinion?
Oh, he's a big fan of Bitcoin.
Well, he might be a big fan of Bitcoin, but the truth is, you should have been in that conversation.
I suppose.
Because, right? And Elon Musk, what am I going to sit there and listen to him just pump it up? I mean, listen, and he made the comment that it fell flat in his face. I may pump it up, but I don't dump it. Really? Every time he opens his mouth, it flies, and then suddenly, and then he opens his mouth again and it collapses. Who's he kidding? But that's a whole other conversation.
But he's actually the least relevant
Kathy
out of those
Wood,
three.
Huh?
He's the least relevant out of those three. At least
exactly
Jack Dorsey
right.
is
exactly
building
right.
Bitcoin
I think
businesses.
Kathy Wood was the one you should listen to.
Yeah, and then Jack Dorsey and then Elon Musk.
I think, I absolutely. If I had to put him in that order, you're right. I would have put him at the bottom of the chain.
Definitely.
I think they put him in there just because he's a personality that people seem to be fascinated with. And they go, oh my God, Elon Musk going to talk at this event, and everybody flocks to it because it's Elon Musk. Okay, but if you heard some of his comments yesterday, you'd sit there and go, why am I wasting my time?
Well, that's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. He's almost like famous because he's famous.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
So weird.
Exactly. He's almost famous because he's famous. You're right. And I'm not taking anything away from the guy in terms of Tesla and SpaceX or whatever he's got. Whatever it is. I'm not taking anything away from the guy, right? Because he has, in fact, changed parts of the world. I get it. But I'm not going to him for analysis or guidance on Bitcoin. Exactly. I'm going to you.
Okay.
I mean, that's my opinion. I think you'd run circles around him. I think you'd sit there and talk to him and he'd go, what? You know what I mean?
Sure, because he's spending his days doing other things.
Understood. So if I want an education or I want an understanding about Bitcoin, Elon Musk is the last person I'm going to. Right? It's entertaining to watch, but I'm not going to him for guidance. Why? He says buy it, so I go out and buy it? He told me to buy doggy coin, so I go out and buy doggy coin? Are you kidding me?
I hope not.
No, of course not. But the sad part about it is there are people that do that.
Well, he doesn't have a fiduciary responsibility.
Well, exactly right. He does not have a fiduciary responsibility, which is why he gets away with it. Right?
Yep.
Anyway,
Great.
whatever. We could sit here and just chat that up all afternoon.
We could. We'll have to do a separate one on that one. We've gone long so far, so I think we'll wind it up. You're very good.
Yeah.
All right, Kenny, thanks very much for joining me today on this episode of the Weiss Crypto Sunday Special.
Yeah, listen, that whole 15-minute conversation turned into an hour and 15 minutes.
It did.
Just so you know.
We knew it would. You know.
All right, I'll
Okay,
talk
thanks
to you
for
later.
being on. All right. That's going to do it for this edition of the Weiss Crypto Sunday Special with me, your host, Chris Coney. Until the next one, it's bye for now.